When you turn to the topic of women in the Torah, it's sometimes a challenging topic because they are not the major figures who do all of the exciting things. They do not go up to the mountain to meet Moses and to see God. In fact, Moses tells the Israelites when he's going to meet God, don't go near a woman. Because from Moses' perspective, the Israelites means the men. We hear of the children they bear. We hear of the men they marry, or the men who marry them. But we don't always hear their names. Too many characters are Noah's wife, the wife of. In fact, in Hebrew, the word for wife of is just woman. Think of the Gershwin musical, Porgy and Bess. Bess, you is my woman. Well, that's how it is in the Bible. He is the Baal, the master. She is the Isha, the woman. And woman is assumed to be married to a man. So finding women's names is sometimes a challenge. What's even more challenging is finding women's agency. They don't leave the home. They don't go wandering in the desert. They don't go adventuring or going to war, although occasionally some do. But their agency is working within the constraints of their society. As we'll see in our Torah portion tonight, sometimes they can, in fact, have a very important impact, but it's always within the boundaries of the world in which they live. And so then the question becomes, what is their lasting contribution to Jewish culture? Are they a patriarch like an Abraham or an Isaac? Or are they matriarchs who give birth and maybe give a name, but don't necessarily do what we think of as action in history or moving the plot forward? What do we do about their legacy? After all, it may have been the case that 300, 500 years ago, being a wife, being a mother was enough. Or at least the culture said that should be enough for you, women. Today, that's not enough. And for some women, it's irrelevant. That's not who they are. That's not how they define themselves. And so if the legacy is the matriarchs who are defined by their matriarchy, by their quality of being a mother, well, maybe that's part of who you are, but it doesn't have to be all of who you are, as it is for so many of them. And so then the last challenge we're left with is, what do they symbolize? Do these matriarchs, these stories in the Hebrew Bible, symbolize powerful women who are acting to control their destiny? Or do they symbolize the oppression of a society that constrained women's possibilities and didn't even give them their own voice? All too often, the wife of Lot, who turns to a pillar of salt, doesn't speak. And we don't know what she would have said or thought unless we imagine it ourselves. Humanistic Jews can turn to look at Torah stories, even if we don't think they actually happened in history. After all, we read Hamlet, too. We don't think he did what he did. We read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, knowing he invented many of the things that are articulated, the speeches and so on. He might have drawn on some historical sources, but he was not quoting verbatim when he wrote his stories. And we certainly read fantasy literature and science fiction, and we don't have it doesn't have to be factually true in history to be culturally important or to be inspirational and insightful into the human condition. So when we do read Torah scrolls, we have many lenses through which we can view these stories as stories. For one, we can look at them to see the history of the evolution of Jewish culture and identity. After all, if they don't represent the time they say they are describing, they do represent the time in which they were written. And sometimes we can deduce the backstory of the evolution of Jewish identity, of life, of the very stories themselves, from a close examination of those texts. It's the backstory to how it got written. We can also see important developments in Jewish theology, because we imagine the Bible is monotheistic. But if you actually read the stories, you see the people writing those original stories might not have been as monotheistic as later generations wanted them to be. Just think about the second commandment that says, "You will have no other gods before me." Are there other gods? Well, maybe they have to sit in the back. You can't have them before me, but they may well be there. If you say, "I am a jealous God," what does that mean if there are no other gods? You're only jealous if there's someone else there to be jealous of. Well, so this is one of the challenges in reading the text. We've been told it's one thing, but as we read it with our own lenses, we might see it's something else. There are all kinds of new theories of reading the Hebrew Bible from an economic lens, from a religious evolution lens, as I mentioned. Some people read the text through a queer lens, and David and Jonathan's friendship may be more than a friendship. And of course, we can read this from the lens of women. What's women's experience? What are women's voices? What's not being said or described? And how do we understand these stories looking back with our post-feminist and feminist mindsets? So this story in Genesis chapter 28, which is the beginning of our Torah portion, it's called Vayetzei, which is simply the first word of the Torah portion, and went out. Doesn't necessarily tell you a lot, although in this case it does, because Jacob goes out at the beginning of the Torah portion, and he goes out again at the end of the Torah portion, as we'll see. To give you some context for this story, remember that the first shift of the narrative from the Noah story, which is about all humanity, to the Jewish story is the shift to Abraham, sort of like zeroing in on this one clan from Abraham and his descendants. Abraham is the father of Ishmael, who's expelled, and Isaac, who stays. Isaac is the father of twin sons, Esau, who is the elder son, and Jacob, who is the younger son. But Esau doesn't find favor with Rebekah, the wife. Esau is his father's favorite, but Jacob is his mother's favorite. And when Isaac is old and can't see anymore, with the help of Rebekah, Jacob tricks his father, receives the blessing of the firstborn, and Esau is so angry that Jacob has to flee. Esau is also so angry that he doesn't listen to what his parents want him to do, and he marries a local woman who is not from the clan. So in this story, Jacob is going back to the clan homeland. When Abraham first received his call from the Hebrew God, he left the city of Ur. He already left the city of Ur with his father even before, and moved north from the southern part of Iraq, which is where Ur is to be found, to Haran, which is in the northern part of what is today Iraq, in the Mesopotamia area between the Tigris and Euphrates River. In Haran, this very populous city and settlement, Abraham left behind a nephew named Laban. And so this cousin of Isaac is there, and his son is going back to the clan homeland to find, hopefully, a wife, because after all, Esau married a local girl, and that was a problem. So that's the beginning of our story. Jacob leaving and on his way, fleeing his home to Haran. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He came to a certain place that's not named, and stopped there for the night. The sun had set. He took a stone and put it under his head and lay down in that place. By the way, I have seen stone pillows before. It's not unheard of that people would use that. He had a dream. And behold, a stairway or a ladder. If you've heard of Jacob's ladder, this is the origin for that. A stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached all the way to the sky. Shamayim in Hebrew means both sky and heaven, although in English we have two different words for it. And behold, the Malachei Elohim. Now, a malach in Hebrew could be a messenger, but it also means angels. And so it depends on how you're translating this. Is it the messengers of God, like prophets, or is it the angels of God who are moving up and down between heaven and earth? Most readers see it as angels. And standing beside him was Yahweh. God is just standing next to him? What happened to not believing in a God with a form, and God doesn't have hands and arms? But if God is standing next to him, you can see him. And if we're made in the image of God, maybe he looks like you or me. Well, again, this is an example of that evolution of theology where later generations, by the book of Deuteronomy, would say, God has no form, you saw no form. But earlier stories, God is much more intimate. He's standing next to Jacob when Jacob's having this dream. And this God said, I am Yahweh, or I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham's house, the God of Isaac's house. The ground on which you are lying I will assign to you and to your offspring. So this is a covenant. It's a promise with the ancestral God, the clan God, right? The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, this God with a proper name. I am Zeus. I am Yahweh. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. You'll spread out to the east and west, north and south. All the families of earth will bless themselves by you and your descendants. You sometimes hear people use this line that the earth will bless yourself by your descendants, of the idea that we are a light to the nations. Think of all the Jewish Nobel Prize winners and all the wonderful contributions to society and science that Jewish people have made, and we are something by which other people are blessed. Now, this can be deployed in a positive way when we go out and do community service to help other people. There's actually an organization called American Jewish World Service that goes out and helps in the bottom third of the OECD Development Index. And people sometimes ask American Jewish World Service, why don't you work in Israel? You're American Jewish World Service. And their response is, our mission is not Jews helping Jews. Our mission is Jews helping. So we're going to help the people in the bottom of the third of the OECD index who really need it. That's being a light to the nations. That's causing others to bless themselves. And actually, I heard the director of that organization, the former director, Ruth Messenger, say they love it when we show up because they know we're not going to make them build a church or waste time with Bibles and services. We're just going to help them. And that's a much more, supportive environment for those people that need the help. So God is still talking to Jacob. Remember, I am with you. I'll protect you where you go. I'll bring you back to this land. I will not leave until I have done what I promised you. And Jacob woke up. He said, surely Yahweh is present in this place, and I did not know it. This is a holy site. How awesome is this place? Manorah hamakom, which also means like how terrible, how terrifying is this place. This is none other than the Beit Elohim, the house of God, or the residence of God. This is the gateway to heaven, Shara Shamayim. So early in the morning, you took the stone and set it up as a pillar, poured oil on top of it. You put oil on things to make them holy, to mark them as special, just like kings are anointed with oil to be ordained as a king. And he named that site Beit El, Bethel. I'm sure you've heard of a temple Bethel or congregation Bethel in your life. Beit El means house of God, but it's named after this site, which is in the north of what is today the West Bank. But previously, the name of the city had been Luz. So there was a city there, evidently, but this is an origin story for why it's called Bethel now. And a lot of these stories are these origin stories for names. Why is it called Deerfield? Why is it called... Well, maybe we make up a story about deers growing from trees and... Okay. So you can come up with a story to tell you why the place has a name, and a lot of these Bible stories do exactly that. And now Jacob makes a vow. If God stays with me, protects me on this journey I am making, giving me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and I return safely to my father's house, then Yahweh will be my God. And this stone will be his abode, and all you've given me, I'll set aside a tithe for you. You see how Jacob is trying to bargain? Didn't God just say, I'll do what I promised, and I'll be with you, and you'll have numerous descendants? So what does Jacob say? Well, he wants to flesh out the contract a little bit, right? If he stays with me, protects me on the journey, and give me bread to eat, and give me clothing to wear, and I return safely, then, it's a conditional covenant here. Prove it. Show me, and then I'll let you be my God. And notice the fact that Yahweh was Abraham's God, and that Yahweh was Isaac's God. Jacob is still bargaining. He's still negotiating. He's still trying to be clever. You'll see the cleverness of Jacob comes up again and again in these stories. So that's chapter 28. What do you think of Jacob so far in this story? Is he a hero? Or is he sort of the passive recipient of what the God is giving? Or is he an active recipient trying to control his fate? He's a jerk? Okay. Looking a gift covenant in the mouth? Maybe so. All right, well, we'll go on to our next chapter, because that will even more clearly define the connection to women, because he does arrive in Haran, and guess who he meets? Jacob resumed his journey and came to the people of the east. There was a well in the open, and this describes a scenario where when all the flocks were gathered together, all the shepherds would roll the stone off the well together, because it took all of them to do it, and that way they could water their sheep. But it would be reserved for them because they would roll it back on the stone, and then one person from another town wandering his sheep around, couldn't water them because he couldn't get the stone off by himself. So Jacob says to them, Achi, my brother, me'ain atem, where are you from? And they said, we're from Haran. Now, we don't get, stage instructions in the Hebrew Bible. So they could have been very friendly and said, we're from Haran. Or they could have been very minimalist. Here's this stranger from who knows where, and he wants to know where they're from. He says, brothers, how are you? They don't know he's their brother. So they say, we're from Haran. That's it. Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they say, we know. Yadana, we know him. Again, you get the feeling that they're minimalizing their responses. Hashalom lo, is it peace with him? Is he doing well? Yes, he's doing well, they say. Shalom. Now that could also be get lost, goodbye. But they're giving these very minimal, not friendly responses. And then, v'hine, behold, Rachel, Bito, his daughter Rachel, came with her flock. He said, it is still broad daylight, too early to round them up, water the flock and take them to pasture. And they said, we cannot until all the flocks are rounded up, and then the stone is rolled. We have to wait till all the flocks are in one place before we roll them off. Rachel came with her father's flock, and when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his uncle Laban, and the flock of his uncle Laban, he went up and rolled the stone off the mouth of the well, Jacob by himself. And he watered the flock of his uncle Laban. And then Jacob kissed Rachel, and the Hebrew's even better than this English translation, and he lifted up his voice and he wept. Just as, and he broke into tears. But I like the idea, he raised his voice with a wail and started crying. Why is he crying? Is he crying because he's found love? Is he crying because of relief? I found my people, I found my clan. Is he crying from exertion of having pushed the stone off? He's pulled something? I also sometimes notice the detail. He saw Rachel, the daughter of his uncle Laban, and the flock of his uncle Laban. So maybe it's not just her, but she also has huge flocks of sheep. And that is an attraction to him. If you want to read this from a crass economic standpoint, you could read it that way. Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. Actually, if I remember right, Rebekah is Laban's sister. That's the connection. So Laban is Jacob's uncle. On hearing the news of his sister's son Jacob, Laban ran to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and took him into his house. He told Laban all that had happened, and Laban said to him, you are truly my bone and my flesh. Now, Laban seems to be wonderfully welcoming, right? You've kissed my daughter, but that's okay. You're my flesh. You come in here. You're part of my family. I've heard your story. You're welcome. But as often happens with the trickster, we'll see that Laban has some tricks up his sleeve too. Laban said to Jacob, just because you're a kinsman, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me, what will your wages be? When you're hiring someone, if you ask them to name their starting wage, it's a differing strategy than simply saying, here's what I'll pay you. Now, Laban had two daughters. The name of the older one was Leah, and the younger one was Rachel. And it says here, Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Now, what does it mean to have weak eyes? Does it mean that she couldn't see very well? Does it mean that the color was sort of off? We don't really know. And this is often an opening for interpretation. The rabbis speculated that since Leah was the older daughter and Rachel was the younger daughter, that Leah had been promised to marry Esau, who was a hunter and the man of the field and rough and crude, and so her eyes became weak from all the tears she had wept, imagining herself being married to Esau, where Rachel, the younger one, was always destined for Jacob because he was the younger by a few minutes. But some people read this story and take it the opposite direction. There's a novel that came out about 20 years ago called The Red Tent, actually 25 years ago now, which is a retelling of many of these stories. It's specifically focused on one of Leah's daughters, Dinah, but it tells the story of the foremothers. And in the red tents retelling of this, it says, Leah's eyes weren't weak at all. They were strong, so strong that men had to look away, and they invented this story about her having weak eyes because they couldn't handle the truth. And they couldn't handle how strong she was. So you can tell this is a post-Betty Friedan retelling of the story, right? And that's fine. We're allowed to retell these stories, recast these stories in our image. So that Leah having weak eyes thing is an opening for interpretation, but sometimes the interpreters today are projecting their values back as opposed to deriving them from what might have been plausible at the time. Now this is, I think, the first time in the Bible that it says, Vaye'ehav, oh no, I'm sorry, it's the second time. Jacob loves Rachel. We have the word love. When people get married, it's about clans, it's about tribes, it's not always about love, but in this case, he loves Rachel. By the way, in most literature before modern times, if people fall in love, it ends terribly. Tristan and Isolde, Romeo and Juliet, love is a bad idea. Love just doesn't work out the way you want it to most of the time in these stories. And so he wanted to marry Rachel, and he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. And listen to Laban's endorsement. Better that I give her to you than I should give her to an outsider. Better you than some stranger. Oh, that's what you want. Everyone wants to hear from their father-in-law. Better you than somebody else. Stay with me. And so Jacob worked for 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him, again, this is a wonderful expression, they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. Isn't that a nice expression, that he was so in love that 7 years was like a few days because it was a magic. And then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. My time is fulfilled, that I may cohabit with her. Now the Hebrew is literally, may I come unto her. It's the biblical, sleep with. Laban gathered all the people and made a feast. And the word for feast, by the way, is a mishteh, which comes from the word to drink. So he had a drinking feast. This becomes important. When evening came, Laban took his daughter Leah, the older daughter, and brought her to him, and he cohabited with her. So a switcheroo, right? He wanted Rachel, he got Leah instead. And Laban had given his maidservant Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her maid. When morning came, here was Vahine, and behold, she was Leah. She was not Rachel. Now how drunk did Jacob need to be to not notice that it was the wrong woman in the tent with him? Now, this is again an opening for interpretation, because Jacob supposedly was so smart, this is the rabbis projecting, that he knew that Laban would try to trick him. And so he worked out a special signal with Rachel that she would make to him to make sure it was the right bride. However, when Rachel learned that Leah was going to be substituted, she taught Leah that signal because she didn't want her to lose face. So this is an interpretation to the story that creates a sisterhood between the two, trying to support each other in some way, as opposed to this original story, which has them as the pawns being moved around the chessboard by Laban, and to some extent by Jacob too. This is also the origin of a ritual that's still done even today in Jewish weddings, called bedeken, which is where you check under the veil to make sure it's the right bride before the wedding happens. We often draw roots back to this story. So morning came, and there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, what have you done to me? I was working for Rachel. Why did you deceive me? Again, the irony of Jacob, who has stolen his brother's birthright and stolen the firstborn blessing, saying, why did you trick me? Well, you're the trickster. This is what happens in these stories. Laban said, it's not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before well, you could have told me. Well, Laban wants to get his daughters married off, and now that Esau's gone off the wrong direction, he needs to find someone. Wait until the bridal week of this one is over, and we'll give you that one too, provided you serve me for another 7 years. So Jacob is stuck. He's got to do another round of 7 years, and Jacob did so. He waited out the bridal week of the one, And then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as wife. He didn't have to wait another 7 years. So he had Leah, he had a week with her, and then Rachel became his wife, but he's now signed up for a 7-year contract going forward. And Laban gave his maidservant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maid. And these maidservants, Zilpah and Bilhah, will show up later in the story. Jacob cohabited with Rachel also. Indeed, he loved Rachel more than Leah. Hear the rivalry? The seeds are planted. And so he served Laban another 7 years. Now, seeing that Leah was unloved, and actually the word in Hebrew is, and God saw that hated was Leah, snu'ah, literally hated, not just unloved. He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Remember, in this society, how do you get status as a woman? It's bearing and bearing sons, right? Leah conceived and bore a son and called him Reuven. Notice who gets to name the kid. It's the wife, it's the mother that names the child. Reuven, she declared, Yahweh has seen, Ra'ah, he has seen my affliction. It also means, now my husband will love me. She hoped. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, this is because Yahweh heard, Shama, that I was unloved, and gave me this one also, so his name is Shimon, from the word Shema, to listen. Again she conceived and bore a son. How's she conceiving? Well, obviously, he doesn't hate her that much. I mean, he's rotating between his wives. Again she conceived and bore a son, and declared, this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons, and therefore he was named Levi, which is from to be bound together. She conceived again and bore a son, and declared, this time I will praise God. Yehudah is the name, Judah. And then she stops bearing. So she has these 4 people. Except the readers of this story, when they heard those names, knew they weren't just people. Levi, Yehudah, Reuven, Shimon. These are not just the names of people in the audience hearing this story. They're the names of tribes, the Levites, the tribe of Judah. And they're the name of regions, because each of these tribes has their ancestral territories. So what's going on here? Now, the story will say that later these become the ancestors of several tribes. But anthropology suggests that several tribes decided to become allies and made up the people. They create a shared ancestry to say, we're not just allies, we're brothers. And we do this in America too. We talk about our founding fathers. I'm not related to them. You know, land of the Pilgrim's Pride, land where my fathers died. My fathers died in Syria, they died in Eastern Europe, but they're buried there. But it's still a mythical family, right? And so this is the same kind of political allegiance being made by genealogy. So in the end, at the end of this chapter 29, we have Rachel and Leah both married to Jacob. We have Rachel more loved, Leah more fertile. What do you think the dynamic is between Rachel and Leah? Probably not good. Not good. I mean, sisters are challenging enough, you know, with rivalries and whatever, but having them married to the same person and now having one have children and one not, and one is more loved, but it's set up for disaster. Would they have chosen this route? Probably not. Did they have a choice? Probably not. When Rachel saw that she had borne Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister. Surprise. And Rachel said to Jacob, give me children or I will die. A little exaggerating, but remember, her status as a wife is, can you produce children? Jacob was angry at Rachel, and he said, can I take the place of God who has denied you the fruit of the womb? Like, it's not my fault. I'm trying. Evidently, he's trying. But who's ultimately responsible for fertility is not the husband and not the wife, it's the God. And so what does she do to solve the problem? Here is my maid, Bilhah. Consort with her. Literally, again, come unto her, the biblical sleep with, that she will bear on my knees, and through her I may too have children. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because you might have read Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, or you might have seen the TV show on Hulu, The Handmaid's Tale. It's based on this story. This narrative of infertile women having to use women who can give birth, but having to be their maids. Does Bilhah have a choice? What does Bilhah think about this? We don't hear from Bilhah. So she gave him her maid Bilhah as a concubine, and he cohabited with her too. Jacob doesn't seem to be particular about who he's going to cohabit with. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. And guess who gets to name the son of the maid? It's not the maid. Rachel said, God has judged me, or God has vindicated me. He's listened to my plea and given me a son from the handmaid. And so he is named Dan. Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. And so I've waged a faithful contest with my sister, and I've prevailed, says Rachel. And so she names him Naphtali, because now she can claim I'm loved and I've provided sons, even if they're through the maid. Now, one of the challenges in telling these stories is that we're not so comfortable with maidservants and slaves anymore, certainly as substituting for fertility. And when we talk about the Jewish matriarchs, we talk about Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah, but why don't we talk about Bilhah and Zilpah? I mean, these maidservants, they produced the children. The children were taken from them and claimed by their owners. So some would actually talk about the 6 matriarchs if they're getting into the weeds here. Now, Leah saw that she had stopped bearing children, so she took her maid Zilpah. And if Rachel can do it, Leah can do it too. And Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, what luck, what luck. Ba God, has come luck, and so she called him God, and Leah's maid Zilpah bore him a second son, and said, what fortune, I'll be fortunate. Asher is his name. Again, all these names, Dan, God, these are other tribes of later times, and you can even imagine sort of coalitions within coalitions by who they claim as their mother. The Bilhah tribes, and the Zilpah tribes, and the Leah tribes. So far, no Rachel tribes. Once at the time of the wheat harvest, Reuven, this is one of the older sons, came upon mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. And Rachel said to Leah, give me some of your son's mandrakes. Now here you see the rivalry. Leah says to Rachel, was it not enough for you to take away my husband, that you would also take away my son's mandrakes too? There's resentment there. Rachel replied, I promise he will lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. When Jacob came home, Leah went out to him and said, you are to sleep with me. Who's in charge here? You are to sleep with me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. He lay with her. God heard Leah and bore a 5th son, Issachar. She conceived again and had a 6th son, Zebulun. And last she bore him a daughter and named her Dinah. No story. Not yet anyways. Dinah shows up later. So here we have, at this point, Leah has produced all these sons, both from her and her maid. Rachel has used a maid to produce a few sons, but not very much. And there's still this rivalry between the two. And so finally, God remembered Rachel. He listened to her. He opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son. And so she said, God has taken away my disgrace, finally, and may I have more. Add to this. And so she calls him, may God add a son. Yosef is to add. And this is Joseph. But now you know why Joseph gets the coat of many colors, why he's Jacob's favored. Because he's the first son really from the most loved wife. After Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, let me go back to my homeland. Give me my wives and my children for which I have served you. All right, fine, I'm done. But Laban said to him, if you will indulge me, I have learned by divination that Yahweh has blessed me on your account. He continued, name the wages due for me, and I will pay you. I've been very lucky with you, so tell me what you want. And Jacob is a little angry too. You know well how I've served you, how well your livestock has fared with me. For the little you had before I came has grown to much, since Yahweh blessed you wherever I turned. And now, when shall I make provision for my household? And Laban again says, what do you want me to pay you? But Jacob knows the trick, because the last time Laban says, what do you want for your wages? He wound up working for 14 years. Jacob says, pay me nothing. Let me just pasture and keep your flocks, and I'll take the speckled ones. You know, the pure colored ones are yours, the speckled ones are mine. And in the future, you'll see that my honesty testifies for me. Laban says, okay, but then he sneaks all the speckled ones out of the flock and hides them. But then Jacob sneaks a march on him and has them breed before these special spotted sticks that he has, and they produce spotted offspring. I mean, this is like an attempt at genetic engineering, but you don't hear Rachel or Leah having any part of this process. It's all tricking and tricking someone else and tricking back and using Yahweh behind it to make it happen. So in the end, Jacob does become prosperous and has large flocks, and he heard from other people talking that they're getting restless with him. Laban's manner to him was not as nice as it had been in the past. And finally, the word of Yahweh comes, as we're now in chapter 31. Return to your ancestors' land where you were born, and I will be with you. Remember what Jacob's conditional covenant was? Protect me, feed me, clothe me, and get me home. So now it's time for the last step in Jacob's process. Remember how Vayetzei, how he went out at the beginning? This is where he's going to leave to go home. Now this is a really fascinating scene, because here we have Rachel and Leah as co-conspirators. Jacob had Rachel and Leah called to the field where his flock was, and he said to them, I see that your father's manner toward me is not as it had been in the past, but the God of my father's house has been with me. Notice he doesn't just say, God has been with me, because that would be meaningless in this context. You got to say, the God of my clan, my tribal God. Elohei Avi, the God of my father, has been with me. As you know, I've served your father with all my strength, but your father has cheated me, changing my wages time and again. But God wouldn't let him do me harm, he said. He's sort of summarizing the speckled flock again, the story. This also, by the way, suggests that this was an oral version of the story, where you often have repetition of passages as the storyteller is building drama here. As a reader, it's kind of boring. I just read that. You don't have to tell me again. And so finally, he's talking about the speckled and the streaked and so on. And the messenger gave him the key to solving it. And then the angel said, I am the God of Bethel. Anochi ha'el Bethel. I'm the God of this place. Again, is that one God? No, it's a God in a particular place, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow. Now leave this land and go back to your native land. Time to go. Now, why is he telling Rachel and Leah this? Well, I think he wants them to be on his team, right? Time to get ready to go. But he's sort of testing them. Are they ready to go, or are they really loyal to his father? Because he wants his children, he wants his family. Rachel and Leah answered him, saying, do you think we still have a share in the inheritance of our father's house? Do you think we're sticking around for him? Surely he regards us as outsiders, now that he has sold us and used up our purchase price. We're not in his clan anymore, we're in your clan. Truly, all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Do what God told you. So is Jacob a strong character here, or is he looking for confirmation? And ultimately, it's his wives who are giving him the push to leave. Thereupon he put his children and wives on camels, and he drove off all his livestock and all the wealth he had amassed in Padan Aram to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Meanwhile, Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household idols. Teraphim is the Hebrew word for it. Now, why would she do that? Well, maybe it would get him upset. Maybe he'll come after them to chase, or maybe she still believes in them. You know, just because you have one God that's your clan God doesn't mean you don't want to talk to other gods, and maybe there's a god of the hearth or a god of childbirth, and you have your attachments to what you grew up with. Jacob kept Laban the Aramean in the dark, not telling him that he was fleeing, and he fled with all that he had, all the way across the Euphrates into the hill country of Gilead, which is the north of the land of Israel. On the third day Laban heard, so he took his kinsman with him and pursued him, catching up to him in Gilead. God appeared to Laban at night and said, "Beware of attempting anything with Jacob, good or bad. Don't mess with him." So he is overtaken. Jacob pitches his tent on the height. Oh, didn't want to do that. Let's close that. And so he's in the high ground, and Laban is in other parts of the hill country. And so finally they meet each other. And Laban says to Jacob, "Why did you keep me in the dark? Why did you carry off my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you kidnap them?" Is Laban naive? Does he not realize the tension with Jacob? Well, or maybe he's being dramatic. "Why did you flee in secrecy and mislead me and not tell me? I would have sent you off with festive music, with timbrel and lyre." Do you really think he would have done that? No. This is, drama. "You did not even let me kiss my sons and daughters goodbye." Oh, it was a foolish thing for you to do. "I have it in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father's house said to me, 'Don't do anything with Jacob.' Fine. You had to leave because you were longing for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? You want to go to your God? You want to go to your father? Fine. Why did you take my gods?" So Laban has to answer the charges, right? The first charge was, "Why did you sneak away?" Second charge is, "Why did you take my family from me?" And the third charge is, "Why did you steal my gods?" So responding to charge the first, "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. But anyone with whom you find your gods will not remain alive. I didn't think I could leave with them. But as for the gods, what do I care about those gods? Anyone you find them with, you can kill." So now if you're an audience hearing this story told, you think, "Oh no," because you know that Rachel took them. The narrator told us, but Jacob doesn't know. And it even clarifies here, Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and the tent of the two maidservants and did not find them. Leaving Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. What do you think Rachel is going to do? Give them back? Hide them? If she hides them, how is she going to hide them? Here's how she hides them. And this is the quintessential example of women operating in a men's world. Rachel, meanwhile, had taken the idols and placed them in the camel cushion and sat on them. And Laban rummaged through the tent without finding them. For she said to her father, "Let not my lord take it amiss that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." The way of women is menstruation, right? She's got cramps. She doesn't want to move. And he doesn't want to touch her. And he doesn't understand it, and he stays away. And so that's how she hides them. She's operating within the constraints of a world, but knowing the taboo of menstruation, she's willing to use it to her advantage. And now Jacob became incensed. Laban is now proven to be an idiot because he searched everywhere and didn't find the idols. Jacob spoke up and said to Laban, "What is my crime? What is my guilt that you pursue me? You rummaged through all my things. Have you found any of your household objects? Show me, and we'll decide." And now here you hear all the accumulated resentment. "These 20 years I've spent in your service. Your ewes and she-goats never miscarried. That which was torn by beasts I brought to you. I never brought to you. I myself made good of the loss. Scorching heat ravaged me by day, and frost by night. I didn't sleep. Of the 20 years I served in your household, I served you for 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages time and again. If the God of my father's house had not been with me, you would have sent me away empty-handed." And so finally God noticed me, and that's the judgment that you receive. So Jacob has unburdened himself. Laban spoke up and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, The children are my children, the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. What can I do now about my daughters or the children they have borne? Too late. They're gone. But you see Laban's still trying to claim ownership, like the founder of the corporation that won't let it go. And I think of that picture of Charlton Heston with the Revolutionary War musket, from my cold dead hands. That's the founder with the keys to the building. That's Laban with his extended family. But in the end, Jacob has the right. Let us make a pact, you and I, that will be a witness between us. And so Jacob took a stone and made a pillar, and they gathered stones and made a mound, and they named the spot a couple of different names. Laban named it something in Aramaic, and Jacob named it something in Hebrew, possibly part of their differing language and cultures. And the place was also called Mitzpah, which is a watch site. And this is actually a very common archaeological find, border stones, markers, where it says this side belongs to this person, this side belongs to that person. And so this is an institution in the area that they're drawing on. We've never found this stone, of course, because it didn't happen, but they're setting it in a time and place that makes sense. And so Laban says to Jacob, here is the pillar which I have set up between us. It will be witness that I am not to cross to you past this mound, and you are not to cross to me past this mound with hostile intent. If you come across, disarmed, right? No force is with you. And may the God of Abraham's house and the God of Nahor's house, that's Laban's father. So they're each claiming the God of their ancestor as if they were different gods. May those gods judge, and it even says, Elohei Avihem, the gods of their fathers, judge between us. And Jacob swore by Pachad Yitzchak, which is another name for God, the fear of Isaac. He offered up a sacrifice, and they partook of the meal. They spent the night on the height, and early in the morning, Laban kissed his sons and daughters and bade them goodbye and went home. And Jacob went on his way, meeting messengers of God, or angels. And he called this place Machanaim, the camp of God. And that's the end of the Torah portion. It actually doesn't end exactly at chapter 31. It goes a few verses into chapter 32, because the verses and chapters were added later. Well, there's a narrative where you've got women playing a starring role. I mean, they are not bit characters here. They are significant characters in the story. But they're not the ones who hear from God directly. They're not the ones who make the decisions to move, and yet they are the ones that give Jacob the courage to move. Just like Deborah, the judge, gives Barak, the general, the courage to fight. They're the ones who use their wiles to pull one over on their father, to get revenge in some way, but it has to be subtle. And Laban doesn't know who it is that got the better of him, because they can't tell him. They're still in a limited position. They're still defined by their rivalry with each other, their desire for children. And yet, there is more agency there than you might have expected. Now, what do modern women think of these characters? Some of them are happy to mold themselves in this model of wife and mother and matriarch. Others feel the need to break beyond that, to shatter these roles, and some even want to retell these stories, like the Red Tent, like modern Hebrew poetry, and seeing themselves in this role, they would want to go beyond it. And so their namesakes become a symbol not only of whom they would like to be, but also whom they aspire to be, going beyond these role models. Hopefully, this snapshot into the lives of a few women in the Torah has opened up some ideas for you in terms of how to approach that story from the past, but also to open up new possibilities going forward.